This episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlock Holmes scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, Boscombe Valley was mysterious, Shoscombe Place was old, and the lodge was hysterical, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Was Holmes more of a tea drinker or a coffee fancier? And what are all of the alcoholic drinks mentioned in the stories?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 228, Eyeglasses in the Canon. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look at some of the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
Burt, you're a little blurry. You're out of focus. What's going on?
That means you see me clearly.
Oh, perfect. Well, since this is an audio podcast, you're muffled. You're a little muffled. That'll be a different show where we do hearing aids in the Canon.
What? What?
Exactly. What? Well, this is episode 228. The show notes can be found at ihose.co/trifles228. You can find us all over the place on the social webs as I Hear of Sherlock. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Well, I guess that's about it. That's all you need, really. If you would like to send us a note, we have an email address. You can email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com or comment directly on the show notes at that short URL I gave you, ihose.co/trifles228, all lowercase. We would be delighted to hear from you. I see we are in for another episode here, and this is a cross-canonical episode, one where we look at a kind of a theme and extrapolate it across a number of stories. We're going to be looking specifically at eyeglasses in the canon. Now, you'll recall that a long time ago, I guess it was episode 46, we looked at pince-nez as a form of eyewear in the canon, very specific kind of eyewear. But I think we'd like to go just a little more broadly and look at eyeglasses and see exactly who it was that was affected. Now, before we do that, there was an inspiration for eyeglasses, eyesight, etc. in the canon because Arthur Conan Doyle himself had some experience in the world of eyewear and eye repair.
He did. He had a time in his life where I think he recounts in his memoir, he's traveling on a train and gets into a conversation with someone. And the conversation is all about the great opportunity for medical practitioners in ophthalmology. And now I have to apologize for probably the millionth time for relying on my memory rather than sort of revisiting the particular part in his memoir about this. But I'm pretty sure that's how he presented it. And it was based on this, coming at this particular time in his life that he decided to go off to Germany. He'd been in his early school days, he'd spent at least a year in Austria. So he had some German. And he decided to go to Germany and study to become, I don't know if you would call it, no, it wouldn't be an ophthalmologist, but I don't remember the exact medical term that he studied, but he wanted to become an eye specialist.
Yeah, basically. I think he wanted to become an oculist, which was a term at the time. But my notes have that he studied ophthalmology in Vienna. He had previously studied at the Portsmouth Eye Hospital in order to perform to qualify to perform eye tests and prescribe glasses. And then his friend Vernon Morris had suggested Vienna as a place to spend 6 months and then train to be an eye surgeon.
Oh.
So can you imagine, as if embarking on a new medical specialty and one as delicate as eye surgery, as if that weren't difficult enough, especially for a physician who had already been struggling in practice, struggling so much that he created Sherlock Holmes and, wrote quite a bit on the side to keep himself occupied, that this person would not only have to struggle with the new specialty and the new area of research and learning, but he would have to do so in German. Holy cow. Yeah.
Himmel. You mean to say Himmel?
I can't even imagine. But it's go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because it suggests also what's going on at the time. Well, first of all, this is before, we should just point out to our listeners, this is before he decides to devote himself entirely, as you point out, to literature. He's still looking for a foothold. He's been a practicing physician for 7, 8, 9 years at this point. He hasn't made very much money. I think the most he ever made in his medical practice was about £300 a year. He has these literary aspirations. He really wants to be a writer, but he hadn't made the decision yet. But what's going on is that there's an increase in knowledge about the physiology of the eye, and that part of the medical profession is becoming more advanced and more scientific, and things are being learned. And in fact, there was a story that I turned up just in a sort of a quick review in Bow Bells magazine of 18 November 1892. There was an article in the Health, Beauty, and Toilette column which asked, why is it that we see so many children wearing glasses nowadays when it was not the case 20 years ago? And then there's another article in the York Herald observing that spectacles by persons of various ages has become so general and their manufacture so extensive. Well, what's going on is that, we've mentioned this in the past, the Compulsory Education Act of 1870 is putting more people in school. It's generating a new generation of readers. Now reading clearly is becoming more important to more people. But also in Victorian England, there was a lot more flying around in the atmosphere. So, for example, when you got on a train, it wasn't the thing to open a window and put your head out because you would be swept by steam, burned particles, coal in the air, and things lodging in your eye. And so protecting the eye, having spectacles, and then they became something of a fashion element. And so people were more sensitive to that. And then, with the importance of the Royal Navy, the idea of compulsory examination of children in school about their eyesight testing. There was apparently a text, color blindness and defective eyesight in sailors, and another text, eyesight's in school, compulsory eyesight testing for children. And people in occupations where imperfect vision had a safety impact. And so this is sort of what's going on at the time, in addition to people like Lord Peter Wimsey wearing a monocle.
Well, you raised some very good points there. And I think, what's interesting is the compulsory education coming at a particular time. Also the specialization of medicine, as Conan Doyle himself was undergoing. You typically don't get diagnoses of certain diseases until there are specialists to handle those diseases. And, it's amazing how, autism, for example, has blossomed over the last 50 years. Well, because it only became recognized as such in the last 50 years. Before that, it was called something else. Now, that doesn't mean that years ago people didn't have problems with eyesight. We know Benjamin Franklin, for example, invented the bifocals for people who were both nearsighted and farsighted. So humans having difficulty with their vision is something that goes back quite a ways, but it must have been more acute, as you note, during the late Victorian period and was recognized as such. And, Conan Doyle, you have to give him credit. As horrible a physician as he was a very savvy businessman. And he recognized an opportunity, just like he recognized the opportunity that he had with his writing later on. Charging £1,000 per Sherlock Holmes story to the Strand magazine, and them taking him up on it, right? Very astute. So he would have recognized that there was a trend afoot, that people needed assistance with their eyesight, and threw himself into it. Now, he completely fell out of it, realized that it was too difficult to understand German, as I said before, and quit his studies there. But he had a remaining 2 months left in his stay in Vienna. And during that time, according to his entry on Wikipedia, which is just a shorthand for the 15 or so biographies that we've got of him, during that 2-month stay, he pursued other activities such as ice skating with his wife and drinking with Brinsley Richards of the London Times. And he happened to write the doings of Raffles Haw around that time. So we are thankful for his horrible grasp of German and his little interest in ophthalmology.
Well, you're not doing him much credit there. I mean, when he's drinking with this reporter, he's also working a lot on glasses.
just a different kind of glasses, right? Absolutely. Well, while we take this break, why don't you raise a glass and support our sponsor? It's all well and good to have a subscription to the Baker Street Journal. In fact, the most recent issue just recently came out and is making its way to mailboxes all over the world. But when you're looking for scholarship past rather than present, the easiest way to go about finding that is with the eBSJ. The eBSJ is a PDF archive that provides a complete set of the Baker Street Journal from its inception in 1946 all the way through 2011 on a single DVD in PDF format. That's 276 issues with more than 18,000 pages spanning the old series, the Christmas annuals, and the new series all the way through 2011. Will there be another eBSJ to update us in the last decade? Well, we certainly hope so. What format will it take? Well, that's up to you to find out. But get the eBSJ version 2 on DVD while it's still around. Find it online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Ha, we are back, and let's talk about some of the people in the Sherlock Holmes canon who were optically challenged, people that we come across who were wearing glasses of one sort or another.
Yes, a good place to start is in Sign of Four. We had some lovely conversations in the past about Mr. Sherman and his odd business. What exactly was he? Animal of the Month Club. Maybe he was a Lend-Lease for your various wiper and anteater to people who wanted to perk up their weekends with visit from someone from the forest. But when we see him, he had stooping shoulders, a stringy neck, and blue-tinted glasses. And this is a time when I don't remember the idea behind. I think it's supposed to be protecting your eye against strong light or something like that, or why you would be wearing blue-tinted glasses. But in any case, that was sort of a characteristic of some eyewear in Victorian times, and there he is.
There he is. Well, that's interesting because, in the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes film, I think there's a scene where he's wearing tinted glasses as well, or sunglasses of some sort. It seemed a little out of place for Sherlock Holmes, but, when we look at some of these instances of people wearing tinted glasses in the stories, I think it makes it a little more realistic, or, well, I was going to say palatable, but I don't know what about that movie is palatable.
Yeah, it's interesting because in those days, of course, nobody understood radiation. The ultraviolet spectrum and things like that had not been discovered.
No, and they were protected by the English fog and smog.
That's right, the ultimate UV protection. Yeah. Well, I suppose no one marketed sunscreen, I guess, in Victorian England.
That's probably a definite. Yeah. Well, also, as long as we're mentioning tinted glasses, James Windibank, the nefarious stepfather in A Case of Identity, wore tinted glasses against the glare. That's at least what his stepdaughter, Mary Sutherland, was led to believe. We understand that he was wearing tinted glasses along with that beard as a clever disguise against his nearsighted stepdaughter, who, it clearly worked against.
Yes, that's the first recorded example of what we like to call the Clark Kent effect, which is that if I put these spectacles on, no one will recognize me.
Wasn't there a routine like that years ago where Superman kept taking the glasses on and off and people were like, where did he go? You gotta love the theater of the absurd. We'll cover this just in passing. Of course, Mary Sutherland, I did say that she was nearsighted. She wore pince-nez, but did not wear them to 221B Baker Street. But Holmes and Watson, to his credit, both intuited that she had pince-nez because of the dents on either side of her nose. Another pince-nez wearer was John Openshaw, who visited 221B during the 5 Orange Pips and brought that case to Holmes. And he said, I owe you an apology, he said, raising his golden pince-nez to his eyes. Maybe foreshadowing for that story later on in the return of Sherlock Holmes, the golden pince-nez.
Yes, and a very grandiose entrance by Lord Robert St. Simon from The Noble Bachelor, who advanced slowly into the room, turning his head from left to right and swinging in his right hand the cord which held his golden eyeglasses. Oh boy, what a wonderful wonderful affected gesture that is.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that a great image? You get right there in that little picturesque vignette of Robertson Simon, and in one sentence, you get a sense of exactly what this character was all about. That's great. Well, Jeffro Rucastle was said to have sat at Miss Stoper's elbow with a pair of glasses on his nose, looking very earnestly at the ladies who entered. Well,
yeah, I was always sad that when they did that for the Jeremy Brett series, the Granada series, they cast a great actor as Jeffro Rucastle. But in that scene, as I remember, he was looking out into the street when Violet Hunter, of course, that gave him the ability to be bowled over when he actually turned from the window and looked at her.
Right.
But yes, here we have Jeffro Rucastle peering earnestly at these women, looking for someone who looks like his stepdaughter. And suddenly there's Violet Hunter.
There she was. Also in the villainous camp, we had Wilson Kemp, a little gentleman with glasses, thin in the face but very pleasant in his ways, for he was laughing all the time that he was talking, from the Greek interpreter. And
another famous pair of glasses was worn by Charles Augustus Milverton. And that's one of the rare cases, relatively few cases in the canon, where we find out the color of someone's eyes, particularly a villain, whose gray eyes gleam brightly from behind broad, golden-rimmed glasses.
Yeah, you think about Milverton. Those glasses, again, were kind of central to his character. Certainly illustrated that way by Frederick Dorr Steele and Sidney Paget, but also very carefully characterized this way by Doyle. Speaking of gray eyes, we have Dr. Mortimer, who had a long nose like a beak which jutted out between two keen gray eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. Makes you wonder whether he and Charles Augustus Milverton were at the same optometrist's office.
Yeah. And in Valley of Fear, we see John McMurdo, whose gray eyes gleamed with sudden and dangerous anger from behind his glasses.
Well, are we running into a whole a cadre of people with gray eyes now? I mean,
that's true. Bum bum bum.
I don't know if there's anyone described in the canon as having brown eyes. Maybe we'll do another episode called The Eyes Have It.
Oh, I like that. The eye color. That would be very good.
Yeah. Well,
and then, of course, Nathan Garadeb and the three Garadebs, this eccentric collector, his eyes shone with pleasure as his eyes gleam from behind his big glasses. He's just got big glasses.
Nathan Garadeb, the way he's described having big glasses, I think that's the only case in which the size of glasses are mentioned. But it makes you almost think of this little old man with the big black plastic frames, sitting out in Miami Beach, just kind of, watching the world go by, almost like Harry Carey,
Yes. And Professor Presbury, though, is another one with large glasses. He appeared at the front window, and we were aware of a pair of keen eyes from under shaggy brows, which surveyed us through large horn glasses. And in these days, the horn glasses, unlike the plastic horn rims that became more popular in the 1930s and 40s, although some people today are still making spectacle frames out of real horn, but this would have been actual horn material, horn of an animal that's cut to hold the lenses of eyeglasses.
That must be how all those unicorns died out. The eyeglass trade rose. That's it. And once we could see to look for unicorns, we couldn't find them. Well,
it's true.
Well, it strikes me that through all of this, Conan Doyle clearly bringing his profession to the canon. Oh, one thing I didn't mention in terms of him bringing his profession, in Silver Blaze, what is the weapon of choice that is used against the horse? Why, it is a Weiss cataract knife. A nice nod to the German presence of ophthalmology and Conan Doyle's own potential practice.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But apparently maybe he just brought back some of those instruments or had them left over from his medical studies. Tell me, Dr. Conan Doyle, is your Weiss knife nice? Oh.
Weiss knife nice. Yeah,
it's a very nice knife.
Yeah, Weiss knife nice. Well, it's almost astounding that Conan Doyle didn't write a story called The Bespectacled Band.
Oh, I think he did. But once we find it, it's not even going to be a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You take my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Willoughby Smith had excellent sight. There can be no question that these were snatched from the face or the person of the assassin.